Hello, this is Dr. Anthony Delmond. In this lecture, we've been talking about marketing management orientations, and now we want to move over and start talking about relationship marketing. Relationship marketing is an important concept that runs parallel with marketing management orientations. It involves the types of sales relationships and corresponding levels of effort salespeople exert. There are three levels of relationship marketing that we're going to discuss: transactional, relational, and partnering. In different texts, you're going to see different versions of this. The names might be slightly different, but the concepts are the same across all of them. Transactional selling involves a sales relationship that is based around a single transaction, and it's unlikely to be repeated, or at least the customer is not going to recognize that repetition. An example might be a cheap but long-lasting product that will not soon need to be replaced. Another might be a roadside stand. If there's little chance of repeat business, then the value of building rapport is low. Satisfying the customer may be important for today's sale, but there's no opportunity or need to provide extensive service options or follow-up. Those types of sales are just all or nothing. Salespeople rarely feel the need in those types of situations to invest time learning about the customer or her needs because it's only a one-off. A relational sale involves likely repeat business. It's important to make sure that the customer is satisfied so she will return. For an example, if you're selling seed and you expect a client to come back to you every time for re-ups, you want to make sure that you are satisfying their needs and making them happy because you are following a relational selling type of relationship marketing strategy. So if you're trying to keep somebody available for repeat business, but they're still transactions, you're not actually invested in their business, then you're in that relational selling level. So if you don't expect them to come back, it's transactional. If you hope that they will come back, it's relational. And if you work directly with someone in their business, that's partnering. So if you are invested in that business's success, much like we saw with consultative selling, well, then you're in a partnering relationship. And we see this a lot of times between upstream sellers and maybe downstream middlemen. So, for example, I like to think about when I was living in Wyoming, and there was a farm that supplied the meat to a restaurant in town, and everybody knew where that meat came from. The business was very invested in how much consumers liked the product so that they could determine what they sold to the restaurant. That's a good example of partnering because the farm was very invested in the success of the restaurant. And we can see from this little chart below, for transactional selling, low relationship intensity, not much interaction, and very low maturity for the relationship. On the other end, we can see very mature relationships in the partnering space, near constant interaction. There's always that investment of what's going on, what can we do to improve your situation, and then obviously relationship intensity, you're going to have a long-term relationship. I always have students ask me at this point, what's the best way to build a long-term relationship with customers? And that's a great question, but it's not really one that's very simple to answer because it depends on the business. There isn't a good one-size-fits-all approach to relationship building. It really depends on what products you're looking at. It depends on what the situation is, the customers themselves, and you have to really adapt to the situation. Listen to what your customer's telling you. If they would like to have a long-term relationship with you, they would like to have more interaction, you can pick up on that. We'll talk about how to pick up on these types of things when we get to the communication section. Once upon a time, door-to-door salespeople in particular worked in silos. Essentially, by that I mean that they worked alone. They would go off, leave the business, take their products, and then whatever they did, they would come back with the benefits, the money, the lack of inventory, but there wasn't a lot of information about what they were actually doing, and the processes were not very uniform. But what that meant is that sales depended on one salesperson alone, and it wasn't an easy way to there wasn't an easy way to observe what they were doing. When we talk about ethics, we'll see how that's important. But to share the load in the maintenance of sales relationships today, we see that a lot of businesses, both inside and outside of agriculture, will employ sales teams. Sales teams are just groups of employees that work together in set roles where they are trying to keep a client happy. There are three main roles on a sales team: the leadership role, the sales development role, and the sales relationship role. Not everyone will fit perfectly into this. So a business might have a leadership role that is totally separate from the others, or it may have a role that kind of covers pieces out of all of these. So let's talk about the leadership role first. This is the group. This is the either the single person or group of people who organizes sales. They manage the team of salespeople, and they guide practice. We typically think about a sales manager for this role. So it's somebody who's guiding the sales team. They also may create the sales agenda. If there are objectives for the sales team, this would be the group that sets them. They're going to make sure that everybody's doing their job, and they're going to make sure that clients are happy with the sales team. The sales development role, that's going to be the group that finds prospects, prospective clients. They're going to keep records of everything that's been done, and they might be also the group that reaches out to set up appointments. Again, the sales development role sometimes bleeds into the sales relationship role. It depends on the business. We'll talk about an example in a few minutes, but for the sales relationship role, that's going to be the person who goes out, or the people who go out and do direct sales. So presentations, sales interviews, sales calls. A lot of times they'll be the ones that reach out afterwards to see how the client is doing, but the long-term piece may fall to a new salesperson. We obviously know that salespeople don't stay with the company forever, so sometimes the long-term ally and consultant for the business will fall to other people. But these are the main classes or main roles, and different people will fill different ones. So let's think about an example. The textbook has a different one, but let's talk about a firm selling large farm machinery. A sales manager is probably going to take the leadership role, keeping track of everybody's progress, creating big, broad objectives for the business to follow, and making sure that everybody's doing their part. For the sales development role, remember that's going to be finding new clients, organizing visits. That might be non-sales staff. It might be a secretary. It might be somebody keeping appointments. It might not be somebody who's actually directly involved in the sales profession, but they're still doing sales tasks. And a salesperson is typically going to take the sales relationship role, being in charge of the actual sale and maybe doing some of the follow-up. But again, some of the follow-up might be that non-sales staff. The point is that not all the duties are split evenly for every business. There may be somebody who is acting as a lead, but really they are in the sales relationship role. It just depends on the business and the way that it's set up. When we talk about organizational structures, this will fit kind of into there a bit. Similarly, in B2B sales, so business-to-business sales, we've seen buying teams emerge. Buying teams are just a group of buyers, usually from different functional departments within a business, and they use their unique knowledge sets to determine what's going to be the best for that company. So you might have somebody from HR, you might have somebody from operations, you might have a whole bunch of individuals who will have a different perspective, and they're going to make the decision together on whether or not a product is purchased. Selling to a buying team can be a lot harder because you're trying to satisfy the needs and desires and whims of very, very different people with different perspectives and incentives. So you have to think about what your tactics should be when you're trying to sell to a group rather than an individual. In addition to selling a product directly to clients, sellers are selling something else. They're selling themselves. We talk about this usually as the parallel referral sale, but providing a service and connecting a client with a product and having success there, you may get referrals from those clients. And referral is just when a customer provides information to the salesperson about other potential customers. So giving information about friends, colleagues, anyone else that might be interested. This is a vote of confidence in the salesperson. It's hard to ask for a referral, but it's a crucial part of the sales process. If you can't do it, you're going to really struggle to find new clients. The referral process is how many salespeople expand their network of clients. Not everyone does it this way, but most do. All right, we'll talk about that more later, but I also want to mention before we're done, technology in sales. Technology has really reshaped the sales process. In the last 25 years, we've seen a major change. It was difficult 25 years ago for a potential buyer to learn about the seller, the company, the product. How did you learn about it? Well, you heard about it from your friends, you read about it in the newspaper, but there were no websites dedicated to providing information about products, clients, and sellers and companies. It just wasn't as available because we didn't have the internet. Information asymmetry really favored the seller. The seller had more information than the buyer. But that's shifted. Today, buyers know almost as much about the product, the sellers, and the company as the sellers themselves do. This is because we have aggregated customer product reviews. Think about Amazon's star ratings. Everybody that goes out there and rates a product is going to give us some information, and we're going to be able to use that when we make our choices. Same thing with seller ratings. If we're going to buy something from somebody, we can go out and look at the internet to guide us in how people have felt about that seller in the past. And we also have other aggregators, third-party reviews and accreditations. They give us more information about products and businesses than we ever had before. So with all that information that we didn't have before, we don't need explicit golden rules as much because that transparency makes it easy for buyers to make good, safe decisions. Again, market forces are going to drive the bad salespeople out. However, there's a downside to all this wonderful technology, and that is the automation of sales positions. There's been some research in the last few years that says that within the next 10 or 20 years, we should see that 85 to 90% of sales positions from pre-internet days are gone. So an internet-connected world with big data means that salespeople are getting driven out of the marketplace altogether. It doesn't matter if they're good or bad because we don't need as many salespeople. Those connections and linkages can be made automated. Machines, people can go out and find products themselves. So to stay relevant, salespeople have to keep evolving. And what are they doing? They're using social media marketing. The role of social media marketing in sales is expanding. Major businesses, Bayer, Tyson, John Deere, all of them are relying on extensive social media initiatives to improve the value of their brand. They're getting information out there about themselves by hiring social media people to push their product. And while those people are still in the marketing world, they're not direct salespeople, but they're creating sales for the company and allowing the sales themselves to be automated. All right, so we have a lot of key terms to look at. The ones in yellow are not in the book at this stage, but make sure you have a look at all of these. All right, when we come back next time, we'll talk about organizational structures and ethics.